Meow. Music Plus, the California chain that subtracted success. In the sun-drenched strip malls of Southern California, where palm trees cast shadows over endless rows of retail establishments, a music empire once thrived before crashing spectacularly against the rocks of retail reality. Music Plus, the ambitious record chain that promised to revolutionize how Americans bought their tunes, began its journey in 1977 with all the optimism of a startup band recording their first demo. Founded by Jerry Ade, a former Tower Records executive who believed he could out-hustle his former employer, Music Plus opened its first location in Los Angeles with a simple premise: sell music cheaper, faster, and with better selection than anyone else. Ade had spent years watching Tower Records dominate the West Coast music retail scene, and he was convinced he could build a better mousetrap. The timing seemed perfect. The late 70s were witnessing an explosion in music consumption, with disco, punk, and classic rock all competing for consumers' dollars. What Ade couldn't have predicted was that his mathematical formula for success would ultimately become an equation for disaster, turning Music Plus into a cautionary tale about the perils of rapid expansion, price wars, and misreading the fundamental economics of music retail. The early years of Music Plus read like a Silicon Valley success story transplanted to the entertainment industry. By 1980, just 3 years after opening, the company had expanded to 15 locations across Southern California, each store sporting the distinctive Music Plus logo and promising guaranteed lowest prices in bold letters across their storefronts. Ade's strategy was deceptively simple: purchase massive quantities of albums directly from distributors, pass the volume savings on to customers, and make up for thin margins through high-volume sales. The stores were designed as music supermarkets, sprawling warehouse-style spaces that could stock not just the latest hits, but deep catalogs of jazz, classical, country, and international music. Unlike the cramped, cluttered record stores of the era, Music Plus locations felt modern and organized, with clear sightlines, alphabetized sections, and listening stations where customers could sample albums before purchasing. The company invested heavily in point-of-sale technology that was revolutionary for its time, implementing computerized inventory systems that could track sales patterns and automatically reorder popular titles. By 1982, Music Plus was generating over $50 million in annual revenue, making it one of the fastest-growing music retailers in the country and catching the attention of major record labels who began offering the chain exclusive promotional deals and early access to highly anticipated releases. The mid-80s marked Music Plus's golden age, a period when everything seemed to align perfectly for the ambitious retailer. The compact disc revolution was transforming the music industry, and Music Plus positioned itself as the premier destination for CD shopping in California. While many traditional record stores were slow to embrace the new format, viewing CDs as an expensive fad, Ade recognized that the higher profit margins on compact discs could solve many of his company's financial challenges. Music Plus stores began dedicating enormous floor space to CD displays, often featuring walls of new releases that created an almost museum-like atmosphere for music browsers. The company expanded beyond California for the first time in 1985, opening locations in Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado, with each new market bringing the same aggressive pricing strategy that had worked so well in Los Angeles. By 1987, Music Plus operated 93 stores across the western United States and had become a significant enough player to negotiate directly with major record labels, bypassing traditional distributors and improving their already razor-thin margins. The company went public in 1986, raising $22 million that funded an even more ambitious expansion plan, targeting major metropolitan areas throughout the Southwest and Pacific Northwest. Revenue peaked at over $200 million annually, and Music Plus briefly held the distinction of being the fourth largest music retailer in the United States, behind only Tower Records, Music Land, and Transworld Music. However, beneath the impressive sales figures and rapid expansion, fundamental problems were metastasizing throughout the Music Plus operation, like a baseline that's slightly off-tempo but becomes more noticeable with each measure. The company's obsession with guaranteed lowest prices had created a business model that was fundamentally unsustainable, with gross margins averaging just 18% compared to the industry standard of 25 to 30%. While high-volume sales could theoretically compensate for thin margins, Music Plus discovered that their expansion strategy was creating enormous fixed costs that couldn't be covered by their pricing model. Each new store required significant upfront investment in inventory, equipment, and staff training, but many locations outside of Southern California failed to generate the sales volumes necessary to justify these expenditures. The company's sophisticated inventory management system, which had been an asset in concentrated markets, became a liability as it spread across multiple time zones and regional markets with different musical tastes and buying patterns. Music Plus found itself consistently overstocked with slow-moving inventory in secondary markets, while simultaneously running out of popular titles in their core California locations. The situation was exacerbated by the company's practice of purchasing massive quantities of albums to secure volume discounts, a strategy that worked well for proven hits, but created enormous write-offs when albums failed to sell as expected. By 1988, Music Plus was carrying over $40 million in inventory, much of it consisting of albums that were selling so slowly they would never generate enough revenue to cover their wholesale costs. The late 80s and early 90s brought a perfect storm of challenges that exposed every weakness in Music Plus's business model. The rise of big box retailers like Best Buy and Circuit City transformed music retail from a specialized business into a loss leader category, with electronics giants selling CDs at or below cost to drive traffic for higher margin products. These retailers could absorb losses on music sales that would bankrupt a dedicated music store, fundamentally altering the competitive landscape that Music Plus had been designed to dominate. Simultaneously, the music industry itself was consolidating, with major labels acquiring independent distributors and changing their terms with retailers in ways that particularly disadvantaged mid-sized chains like Music Plus. The company found itself caught between massive competitors who could sell music as a loss leader and smaller independent stores that had much lower overhead costs and could survive on dramatically lower sales volumes. Music Plus's response was to double down on their expansion strategy, opening 37 new stores between 1989 and 1991 in increasingly marginal markets where they had little brand recognition and faced entrenched local competition. The company also attempted to diversify beyond music, adding sections for computer software, video games, and movies, but these efforts only diluted their brand identity without generating sufficient additional revenue. By 1991, same-store sales were declining at an annual rate of 8%, while operating expenses continued to climb, creating a downward spiral that would prove impossible to escape. Management's attempts to reverse Music Plus's fortunes read like a textbook example of how not to handle a retail crisis. In 1992, the company hired a new CEO, Robert Higgins, who had previously worked for several large retail chains but lacked specific experience in music retail. Higgins immediately implemented a series of cost-cutting measures that included reducing staff at individual stores, eliminating many of the listening stations that had differentiated Music Plus from competitors, and negotiating with suppliers to extend payment terms. While these moves temporarily improved cash flow, they also degraded the customer experience that had built the company's reputation and further weakened relationships with record labels who were already concerned about Music Plus's financial stability. The company attempted to renegotiate its lease agreements, seeking lower rents for underperforming locations, but many landlords preferred to terminate relationships rather than reduce revenue from what they perceived as a failing tenant. Music Plus also experimented with different store formats, including smaller express locations in shopping malls and larger superstore concepts that combined music with books and magazines. But these experiments consumed resources without generating sustainable improvements in profitability. Perhaps most damaging was the company's decision to abandon their guaranteed lowest prices promise in 1993, a move that eliminated their primary competitive advantage while failing to improve margins sufficiently to solve their underlying financial problems. Without the pricing advantage that had originally attracted customers, Music Plus locations increasingly resembled generic music stores with higher overhead costs than their competitors and less compelling reason for consumers to choose them over alternatives. The mid-90s witnessed Music Plus's transformation from a troubled but viable retailer into a company in obvious death spiral, desperately grasping at increasingly unlikely strategies for survival. The rise of alternative rock and grunge music should have provided opportunities for a music specialist, but Music Plus found itself consistently behind the curve in identifying and stocking emerging genres, partly because their centralized buying system was too slow to respond to rapidly changing musical trends. The company's financial problems were becoming impossible to hide, with vendors requiring cash-on-delivery terms and several major record labels threatening to cut off shipments due to unpaid invoices that totaled over $12 million by 1994. Music Plus attempted to find a buyer or merger partner, engaging investment bankers to explore options including acquisition by larger retail chains, private equity firms, or even a management buyout, but their debt load and declining sales made the company an unattractive acquisition target. The emergence of online music retailers like CD Now and Amazon represented another existential threat that Music Plus was poorly positioned to address, lacking both the technical expertise and financial resources necessary to develop a meaningful internet presence. In 1995, the company was forced to close 47 underperforming locations, laying off over 800 employees and taking a restructuring charge that pushed them into their first annual loss since the early 80s. The store closures provided temporary relief, but also reduced the company's purchasing power with suppliers, creating a vicious cycle where their remaining locations became less competitive due to higher wholesale costs. The final years of Music Plus unfolded with the grim inevitability of a Greek tragedy, each attempt to avoid disaster only hastening the company's ultimate demise. By 1997, the chain had shrunk to fewer than 30 locations, all concentrated in Southern California, where they still maintained some brand recognition and customer loyalty. The company's stock price, which had peaked at over $18 per share in 1987, was trading below $2 and faced potential delisting from NASDAQ due to failure to meet minimum market capitalization requirements. Music Plus made a last-ditch effort to reinvent itself as a specialty retailer focusing on hard-to-find imports and limited-edition releases, but this strategy required exactly the kind of deep music knowledge and flexible inventory management that their corporate structure had systematically eliminated over the previous decade. The rise of music downloading, while still in its infancy in the late 90s, represented yet another threat to physical music retail that Music Plus was completely unprepared to address. Their attempts to partner with early digital music services came to nothing, partly because their own financial instability made them an unreliable partner for technology companies seeking to establish themselves in the emerging digital music space. In 1998, Music Plus filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, hoping to reorganize their debts and emerge as a smaller but viable company, but their creditors had lost faith in management's ability to execute any turnaround strategy. The bankruptcy proceedings revealed the full extent of the company's problems, including over $60 million in debt, ongoing losses at nearly every location, and inventory that was worth less than 50 cents on the dollar due to obsolete stock and damaged merchandise. The final liquidation of Music Plus in 1999 marked the end of one of the most spectacular failures in music retail history, a company that had grown from a single Los Angeles storefront to nearly 100 locations before collapsing under the weight of its own ambitions. The company's intellectual property, including the Music Plus name and customer database, was sold to Transworld Entertainment for less than $2 million, a fraction of what the brand had been worth at its peak. Most of the remaining store locations were converted to other retailers or remained vacant for months, serving as stark reminders of how quickly retail fortunes could change in an increasingly competitive marketplace. The liquidation sales that marked Music Plus's final months became something of a cultural phenomenon, with music fans flocking to stores to purchase CDs at steep discounts, creating some of the highest sales volumes in the company's history, even as it prepared to disappear forever. Industry analysts estimated that Music Plus had lost over $100 million during its final 5 years of operation, money that had been invested by shareholders who believed in management's promises of sustainable growth and market dominance. The failure was particularly painful for the company's employees, many of whom had worked for Music Plus for over a decade and genuinely believed they were part of building something special in the music industry. Jerry Ade, the founder who had started the company with such optimism 22 years earlier, retired from the music business entirely, later stating in interviews that the rapid changes in retail and technology had made his original vision impossible to sustain. The legacy of Music Plus serves as a masterclass in how even innovative companies can fail when they lose sight of the fundamental economics that make retail businesses viable. The company's story illustrates the dangers of prioritizing growth over profitability, a mistake that would be repeated by numerous dot-com companies just a few years later with eerily similar results. Music Plus had genuinely revolutionized music retail in many ways, introducing inventory management systems, store layouts, and customer service concepts that were widely imitated throughout the industry. But these innovations couldn't overcome a pricing strategy that was fundamentally unsustainable in the long term. The rise and fall of Music Plus also foreshadowed the broader challenges that would face all physical music retailers as technology transformed how consumers discovered, purchased, and consumed music, making the company's failure seem almost inevitable in retrospect. Perhaps most tragically, Music Plus collapsed just as the music industry was entering a period of unprecedented profitability that would last until file sharing began to impact sales in the early 2000s, meaning the company missed out on what might have been its best opportunity for sustainable success. Today, as streaming services dominate music consumption and physical music retail has largely disappeared except for niche markets, Music Plus stands as a reminder that in retail, as in music, timing is everything, and even the most ambitious plans can fall flat if the underlying rhythm is fundamentally flawed. The California chain that promised to add value to music retail had instead subtracted itself from existence, leaving behind only memories of what might have been and lessons about the unforgiving mathematics of modern commerce.